On Christmas Day, the lonely millionaire opened the doors of his mansion to a humble waitress who needed money, pretending to welcome her as a guest. But when an intruder dropped an envelope with old photographs, revealing a dark link between their families, June's voice faltered, and Noah felt his blood run cold. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The snow was falling outside, thin and silent, painting the landscape white before the large office window. Noah stood there, staring at the fogged-up glass, spinning his phone between his fingers with an anxiety that didn't match his public image of a confident man. He knew December was drawing to a close, and Christmas would soon arrive. He had spent so many Christmases alone that this time he decided to do something unusual: hire someone to pretend to be his companion. Despite the shadow of embarrassment, he waited for June's reply, the young waitress from the downtown diner. Meanwhile, a few miles away, June was picking up the last napkin from a table near the window of the modest restaurant where she worked. The night was dark, the cold wind blew outside, and she still felt the vibrations of the day's hard work. She needed the money to pay off debts, help her family, and put food on the table. Thinking about the proposal she had received, to spend Christmas Eve pretending to be a rich stranger's guest in exchange for significant pay, made her stomach churn. It felt odd, even absurd, but the paycheck was tempting. She hesitated as she grabbed her worn bag, her hands still trembling from exhaustion. Finally, she took a deep breath and sent her confirmation via text, praying it wasn't a mistake. It didn't take long for the luxury car to arrive at the restaurant. A tall man with a stern expression introduced himself as Richard. He was Noah's personal assistant, and he maintained a tense, almost impatient demeanor. He invited June to step into the car, opening the door with courteous yet impersonal efficiency. Throughout the journey, silence was the soundtrack. The city sparkled with Christmas lights, but inside the vehicle, the atmosphere was icy. June, uncomfortable, watched as the buildings faded into the distance, the urban scenery giving way to wider, quieter streets. She wondered if the money would be worth it, whether she'd be treated as a person or just an accessory meant to impress. When they arrived at the mansion, June was stunned. The structure was immense, with columns and a meticulously groomed garden adorned with twinkling lights that danced on the tree branches. The illumination reflected off the windows, creating a warm effect, though she didn't feel particularly welcomed. Richard guided her to the main door, pushing it gently open. Inside, the hall was vast, polished, and impressively quiet. The faint scent of pine and spices evoked Christmas, but in a distant way. Then Noah appeared at the end of the hallway, stopping a few steps from June. He wasn't as old as she had imagined, nor as intimidating as his status suggested. His expression was weary, and an uncertain smile graced his face. "Welcome," he said in a low voice. For a moment, they seemed like two strangers staging an awkward meeting. June tried to smile, unsure whether to treat him as a boss or a host. He, on the other hand, didn't know if he should crack a joke or remain formal. They stood like that, in silence, until firm footsteps echoed on the polished floor. Marta, the housekeeper, entered the room carrying a tray. A middle-aged woman with a kind gaze and a soft voice. She said, "I brought hot tea. It'll help warm you up," casting a gentle look at June, as if the presence of someone new might freshen the heavy atmosphere of the house. June thanked her, adjusting the strap of her worn bag on her shoulder. Marta was the first person to make her feel even remotely comfortable. The living room was lit by candles, and a crackling fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, adorned with red and gold ornaments. June stepped closer, captivated by the beauty of the scene, yet acutely aware that she didn't belong in this world. From a distance, Noah observed her, wondering what was running through her mind. He didn't want her to feel exploited, but he struggled to express this. He approached her, clearing his throat, and explained the situation as clearly as he could. She was to pretend to be his Christmas guest, conveying to his relatives the impression that everything was fine, that he would spend the holidays with someone and appear happy. He needed this illusion. June listened attentively, her eyes fixed on the carpet, trying to understand how far this arrangement would go. When he finished explaining, an awkward silence fell. June bit her lower lip thoughtfully. On one hand, she was there for the money. On the other, she didn't want to feel like a purchased object. She nodded slightly, agreeing to the arrangement. "All right, I'll try to help," she said in a quiet, unenthusiastic voice. Noah thanked her, feeling somewhat relieved, though he still didn't know how to break the invisible barrier between them. They exchanged fleeting glances. He, standing near the fireplace with his hands buried in the pockets of his sweater, and she, by the Christmas tree, clutching her cup of tea as if it were an anchor. It was as if they were on an unpolished stage, unsure of when to start acting. The silence seemed to grow, and when Richard re-entered the room, adjusting his cufflinks, he shot a skeptical glance at June. To him, the humble, unfamiliar girl didn't inspire trust. He said nothing, merely furrowed his brow and resumed monitoring the surroundings. Marta led June through the expansive corridors to a well-kept guest room with fresh linens and a softly glowing lamp. June placed her small bag beside the bed and took a deep breath. The house was enormous, but it lacked something essential. There were no laughs, voices, or echoes of happiness. It felt like a place built to impress, not to embrace. While Marta quietly explained the breakfast schedule, June noticed the many closed doors, as if secrets dwelled within the silence of those walls. The housekeeper smiled almost maternally before leaving her alone. Downstairs, near Noah's office, a shadow moved silently. Someone outside the window lurked, reflected in the glass, indistinct in the dim light. The mansion was too large for every corner to be secure. The winter night cloaked the outside world in darkness, and no alarms had yet sounded, but an uninvited presence was watching. Noah bid June good night with a reserved smile before she went upstairs. He, too, sensed how odd the situation was. He felt guilty, but didn't know how to show her he wasn't an arrogant monster, just a lonely man, tired of wearing a mask to please distant relatives. They exchanged a glance that lingered for a second longer than expected, and June returned a timid smile, a tacit truce. She then ascended the dark wooden staircase, her figure disappearing around the corner. As she closed the door to her room, the house seemed to hold its breath. Each person, in their respective space, wondered what would come next. Noah, still downstairs, fidgeted with Christmas ornaments, pretending to be calm. Richard, at the end of the hallway, remained on alert. Marta collected an empty tray in the kitchen, lost in thought. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering mysterious footprints, and at that precise moment of heavy silence, a faint sound broke through. A light tap on Noah's office window, something delicately brushing against the glass, as though invisible fingers sought attention. The closed curtains revealed nothing, only hinting at an unknown danger. As June closed her room door, a faint noise at Noah's office window hinted that something darker was about to unfold. The night was quiet, except for the faint crackle of wood warming in the fireplace. June woke with a start, the memory of that faint noise at the office window pulsing in her thoughts. Wrapped in the soft blanket of the guest room, she felt a chill run down her spine. She groped for her phone on the bedside table and checked the time. It was still early. The mansion was shrouded in shadows, the silence amplifying the tension in the air. She shouldn't feel so nervous, she thought. After all, she was only there to help Noah maintain the appearance of companionship. But something strange had happened the previous night. Caught in these thoughts, she got up, rubbing her face gently. She opened the door cautiously, peeking into the hallway. The soft glow of a distant lamp outlined the silhouettes of the furniture, and the polished wood of the floor reflected a dull shine. She walked quietly, one step at a time, wary and curious. There were no voices, no footsteps. Perhaps it had just been the wind or a branch tapping the glass. Still, she needed to be sure. She had to understand what kind of situation she'd gotten herself into. The previous night had moved too quickly. The contract, the sudden arrival, that strange interaction with Noah, Richard's hard stare, Marta's sweetness, the distant sparkle of the Christmas tree in the main room, and then the ominous sound at the office window. Now she descended the stairs carefully, her hand on the cold railing, taking in the woody scent of the place. She reached the main hallway of the ground floor, passing by a gilded framed mirror, and finally stood before the closed door of Noah's office. Outside, she pressed her ear against the wood, hearing only her own racing heartbeat. Nothing. She tried the doorknob, and, to her surprise, it wasn't locked. Inside, the darkness was pierced by a sliver of streetlight filtering through the curtains. The room's contours slowly revealed themselves. A large desk, leather armchairs, bookshelves packed tight, and, across from her, the window where someone had tried to get in. As she approached, she felt the cold seeping through the crack in the glass. For a moment, she thought she saw a mark, as if someone had attempted to force the window latch. Her breath quickened. Then she heard a faint sound from the garden, a rustling of branches, a creak of something stepping on snow. She wanted to pull back the curtain and look, but feared revealing her presence. Finally, summoning the courage, she drew one side of the fabric aside, her eyes scanning the moonlit garden. Aside from the soft glow of the outdoor lamps, she saw no one. Yet unease took hold. Someone had been there, not by accident. At that moment, her foot brushed against a vase on the floor, making a hollow sound. Startled, she let out a small cry. Before she could recover, she heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. Lights flicked on abruptly. Noah and Richard burst in, breathless, asking what had happened. Marta followed close behind, frightened, clutching a flashlight. The office flooded with light, and June found herself surrounded by anxious stares. I heard a noise at the window last night. I couldn't sleep, so I came to check, she explained, still breathless. Richard narrowed his eyes, skeptical. But Noah, though puzzled, saw the fear etched on her face. Before they could ask more, a metallic sound seized everyone's attention. The window rattled, as if someone outside was trying to force it open again. June's eyes widened. Richard stepped forward. and Noah ran to grab something for defense. The next moment was a blur of swift motions. The window burst open with a sharp crack, and a masked man shoved his arm inside, trying to unlatch the other pane. June stepped back, and Marta let out a muffled scream. Richard lunged forward, trying to grab the intruder, while Noah, wide-eyed, struggled to push the desk against the opening. The man outside was strong and agile. He broke free of Richard's grip, kicked something against the glass, and the sharp sound of breaking shards erupted along the windowsill. Panicked, June searched for something to help. Crouching near the bookshelf, she grabbed a heavy metal Christmas ornament. As the intruder pushed his body through the opening, she hurled the object at him, hitting his shoulder. The pain made him retreat. Richard tried to grab his legs, but the man was too quick and slipped away, disappearing back into the snow-covered garden. The silent night was shattered by shouts and the scraping of furniture. In seconds, the intruder was gone, vanishing beyond sight into the snowy expanse. Noah, panting, moved toward the window. The glass was damaged, shards glittering on the carpet. Marta trembled in the corner, struggling to process what had just occurred. Richard ran a hand through his hair, irritated that the man had escaped. As they tried to catch their breath, June noticed a crumpled piece of paper on the floor near the windowsill. Perhaps it had fallen from the intruder's pocket. She picked up the envelope carefully, slightly dirty and creased. When Noah noticed, he leaned down beside her, exchanging a grave look. Upon opening it, they found documents that, at first glance, seemed incriminating. Photos of June and Noah, clippings, and notes suggesting someone knew about their arrangement. Noah leafed through the papers quickly, his expression growing darker with each page. June watched nervously from the corner of her eye. There were images of her arriving at the mansion, others hinting at a prearranged meeting, and handwritten text demanding money under the threat of scandal. Noah's fingers trembled with anger and concern. June felt exposed and exploited, even more than she had the night before. This wasn't just a lonely man seeking company for Christmas. Something darker was at play, a scheme that jeopardized her reputation and the weight of Noah's wealth. Richard, realizing the contents of the envelope, clenched his jaw. "I knew this could happen. We can't involve the police recklessly. This will leak to the media. We need to think." Marta, paler than ever, nodded silently. June took a step back, clutching the envelope. Her head swirled. She hadn't anticipated this unusual contract pulling everyone into a real threat. What did this mean? Who was behind this blackmail? And why had they chosen her, a humble waitress, to be caught up in this plan? Noah ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. The situation was disastrous. It was clear the intruder wanted evidence to leverage against him. If this went public, not only would his reputation be ruined, but June's image would also be tarnished. She wasn't to blame. She only needed the money. He, who had orchestrated this entire charade, was now ensnared in his own traps. With the envelope in hand and his heart heavy, Noah lifted his gaze. Standing before him was June, pale, shocked, her breath still uneven from the confrontation. Their eyes met, wordless. There was no need for explanation. They both understood. This Christmas would not just be a ruse to deceive distant relatives. Now, a real danger loomed, a blackmailer lurking in the shadows, ready to destroy everything. June's stomach churned. She was tangled in a web of lies and secrets. She had no idea where it would all lead. Noah locked eyes with June, realizing this Christmas wouldn't just be an act. They were both caught in a dangerous game, and she had no clue how far it would go. The day dawned as if nothing had happened the night before, but within the mansion, everyone felt an invisible weight pressing on their shoulders. The snow continued to fall silently beyond the windows, and the Christmas atmosphere contrasted with the fear and mistrust that colored every glance exchanged. Noah sat by the fireplace, rubbing his hands as if the warmth could dissipate his worries. Beside him, Richard organized papers, trying to find some pattern in the documents discovered the previous night. Marta, silent, brought a pot of strong coffee and warm croissants, though no one seemed to have an appetite. June had come down the stairs early, her eyes weary and her heart still racing. The night had been difficult, filled with memories of the break-in, the photos, and the threats. Now, as she stepped onto the cold floor of the hallway, she questioned what exactly was keeping her there. She needed the money, but everything was becoming too dangerous. Entering the living room, she exchanged a quick glance with Noah, saying nothing. The tension in the air was palpable. He approached her, clearing his throat before speaking. "I got another message, this time on my phone. He wants payment by Christmas Eve." His voice was low, restrained, but she understood the gravity of the situation. "If I don't pay, everything will come out. My reputation, well, you understand." He paused, studying June's expression, trying to gauge what she was thinking. She nodded, uncertain if she felt anger or pity. She needed to understand why she was caught up in this dirty mess. Richard joined the conversation, his brow furrowed. "I need to tighten security, but we can't involve the police openly. Any misstep, and the blackmailer leaks the information." He fell silent for a moment, glancing at June from the corner of his eye, still suspicious. To him, it was hard to believe that this simple girl wasn't some plant by their adversary. Across the room, Marta was polishing a porcelain vase, casting worried looks but never interfering. As Noah and Richard discussed their next steps, June stepped back, letting them handle it. She felt lost, but refused to be just a passive object. Then, something caught her attention. An old photograph resting on the table, stuck to a newspaper clipping. She approached it carefully, picking it up. It was of Noah's father, younger, posing next to an unknown man. Among the papers left by the intruder, there was something related to this man. Her eyes scanned the faded lines of the newspaper, searching for a name, a clue. That face looked strangely familiar. Before she could recall the memory, Noah appeared beside her. "That photo, it's from my father's files. He had a lot of business dealings, partnerships, agreements. I don't know who this man is, but the blackmailer left several similar pictures. He seemed embarrassed not to know the secrets of his own family." June set the photo back on the table, thoughtful. The morning wore on. Outside, the snow intensified, blanketing the trees and garden entrance with a white mantle. Every passing minute made the blackmailer's threat feel more real. Noah's family called via video, demanding details about the Christmas celebrations. They wanted to see the special guest, the person who would show that Noah wasn't alone. He stalled, blaming technical issues. However, he couldn't keep deflecting forever. June wandered through the house, trying to better understand her surroundings. Passing by the library, the slightly ajar door invited her in. It was a large space, walls lined with shelves crammed with books, the smell of old paper filling the air. A skylight let in the pale winter light. She ran her finger along the spines, reading titles, and in an almost forgotten corner, she found a scrapbook of clippings and old letters. Leafing through it, she found more old photos, more unknown names, and vague references to modest neighborhoods in the city. One of these neighborhoods she knew well. It was where she had grown up, where her mother had worked tirelessly, cleaning houses and trying to survive. Every page turned seemed to bring her closer to a larger secret, a strange connection between Noah's family and her own. Somehow, it wasn't a coincidence that she had been chosen. There was something more. June bit her lower lip, uneasy. She needed answers, but didn't know if she could trust Noah. Shortly after, Noah found her in the library. He approached without ceremony. "Did you find anything?" he asked, trying to sound calm, though there was concern in his voice. June hesitated. "There are old photos of your father, with people who worked in the neighborhood where my mother lived. I don't know if it's connected, but—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. Noah clenched his jaw, uneasy. "This is crazy. I didn't know our families had any connection." Richard appeared at the library door, scowling. "The press is circling the front gate. They want to know why you haven't announced anything about the celebrations, Noah. You need to act fast." Noah scratched the back of his neck, his mind weighed down by so many pressures. June, beside him, tried to stay calm, but felt the same anguish. She didn't want to be seen as complicit in a scandal. Marta entered silently, setting down a steaming cup of tea on the table. She gave June a sympathetic look, as if to say, "It'll be okay. Don't give up." At that moment, Noah's phone vibrated. An anonymous message with direct threats. The blackmailer wanted the money by Christmas Eve, or they would release the photos and all the sordid details to the media. The mention of June was explicit, proving they knew exactly who she was. June trembled inside but clenched her teeth, determined to understand why she was involved. "You might think I have nothing to do with this, but it's not true. Why me? Why did they choose me? My family has nothing to do with yours. Or does it?" Noah wiped the sweat from his brow, averting his gaze. He didn't know what to say. He didn't want to believe that his family's past was tied to the life of this humble waitress who had entered his home as part of a strange arrangement. As they walked toward June's guest room, the two moved side by side, wrapped in their thoughts. The mansion, once too silent, now felt like a stage where old truths struggled to surface. Christmas was supposed to bring warmth and hope, but here it only seemed to deepen old wounds. Near her door, June stopped, staring at Noah with intensity. She needed to understand. The blackmailer hadn't chosen her at random. There was a reason, and she wouldn't leave without answer. Noah took a deep breath. "I need to save my name, protect myself, my family, but I don't want to drag you into this." She studied him with a sad look. This wasn't just about reputation. There was something deeper. Secrets buried in yellowed documents and black and white photos. In a whisper, June voiced the burning question that had been gnawing at her all day. "Why me?" The question echoed down the empty corridor, leaving Noah without an answer. The previous night seemed to have left deep scars. The silence of that morning was thick and uncomfortable, as if the house itself was weary of the secrets whispering between its walls. June hadn't slept well. The question she'd asked Noah the night before still churned in her mind. Why her? The memory of the strange agreement, the intruder at the window, the compromising photos, it all seemed far more complicated than a simple Christmas job. Now, with the blackmailer's deadline closing in, Time was slipping away too fast. Noah found her in the living room, where the light filtered through stained glass windows, casting soft shadows on the rug. His hands were in his pockets, his expression heavy. "I tried reaching out to the blackmailer," he said quietly. "I offered a significant amount, but he didn't respond. It seems like he wants to keep us dangling until the last moment." His eyes betrayed a growing desperation. June studied him carefully, trying to discern if it was just fear of losing his reputation or something deeper. She wasn't sure she trusted him, but she needed to stay calm. Her thoughts wandered to her mother, the bills to pay, her humble life outside of this wealthy, soulless world. She'd been lured into it, and now she was trapped in a web of intrigue. "What do we do then?" she murmured, searching for answers in his gaze. Noah took a deep breath and looked toward the window. "Richard is reinforcing security. We can't involve the police directly, but he'll try to find traces outside. I'm going up to the attic. My father's belongings are there, documents that might give us some clues. Will you come with me?" June hesitated. Why not? Perhaps the attic held the key to the mystery. She agreed, and together they climbed the creaky stairs, the sound echoing through the hollow house. With each step, the light dimmed, and the air grew heavier. When they reached the closed attic door, Noah reached into his pocket for the key, frowning when he realized it was already unlocked. Marta should have secured it, but now it seemed someone had been there. The attic smelled of old wood and dust, stacks of boxes, time-worn trunks, and furniture draped with yellowed sheets filled the space. June ran her fingers across the lid of a trunk, leaving a clean streak in the dust. Noah moved toward a low cabinet, opening it to reveal old papers and forgotten objects. The dim light from a small window illuminated just enough to see, adding a ghostly air to the place. As they sifted through papers, June's attention was drawn to a name repeated several times. It was the surname of a former business partner of Noah's father, someone who had apparently been wronged, ruined, and vanished. She exchanged a quick, intrigued glance with Noah. Who was this man? Before he could answer, heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs. They froze. In the attic, every sound seemed amplified and menacing. "Richard?" Noah ventured, but there was no reply. Suddenly, a large man appeared in the doorway, his face partially covered by a dark scarf. June stifled a gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. The man wielded a metal rod, positioning himself between them and the exit. Noah tried to speak, but the intruder advanced without hesitation. In the scuffle, a box toppled, spilling papers and old knickknacks across the floor. Noah stumbled backward, taking a glancing blow to his shoulder and groaning in pain. June, frantic, searched for something to defend herself with. Her eyes landed on a heavy metal object, an old candlestick, perhaps, and she grabbed it with both hands. As the intruder turned his attention to Noah, poised to strike again, June lunged from behind and struck him in the back with all her strength. He staggered, startled by her intervention. Seizing the moment, Noah tried to grab the rod. The three of them struggled in the confined space, knocking over boxes and scattering dusty contents across the wooden floor. The intruder was strong, but he hadn't expected them to fight back together. When he realized he was outmatched, he twisted away, shoved Noah into a pile of old cushions, and bolted for the exit. His hurried footsteps clattered down the stairs, and he was gone in moments. Silence returned, broken only by June and Noah's labored breathing. On the floor amidst the scattered papers, June noticed a small metallic object gleaming in the faint light. It was an old keychain, its initials engraved in the metal. She picked it up, frowning. Those initials, they struck her immediately. They belonged to a former employer who had exploited her mother years ago. A chill ran down her spine. How did this keychain end up here? Still wincing in pain, Noah rose and steadied himself with a hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, concerned. She nodded, concealing the keychain in her closed fist. Something far more serious was unfolding. This wasn't just about blackmail. It was a calculated act of revenge, with June as a pawn in a vendetta against Noah's family. Everything made even less sense now. Why intertwine these stories? Who was orchestrating it all? They descended from the attic in silence, both lost in a whirlwind of unanswered questions. In the corridor, they found Marta, alarmed by the commotion. Richard arrived shortly after, frustrated that he hadn't intercepted the intruder. There was no trace of the man outside. The wind rattled the windows, and snow continued to fall, erasing any tracks. They were trapped in this puzzle, edging ever closer to a dangerous revelation. Noah looked at June, noticing the tension on her face. She took a deep breath and opened her hand, revealing the keychain. These initials, they belong to the family that exploited my mother. How does this connect to your family? Noah shook his head, incredulous. I have no idea. But now we have another clue. She gazed at him with a mix of anger and confusion. She could no longer pretend this was just an odd job. She was entangled in something far deeper than she'd signed up for. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his pain evident, but his gesture attempting to convey reassurance. We'll figure this out. I won't let them use you like this. For the first time, his words felt more sincere than desperate. They shared a moment of silent understanding, while Marta and Richard whispered worriedly. Christmas was approaching. Time was running out, and the tension was unbearable. The blackmailer wanted money, but perhaps he wanted more. Revenge. As they left the corridor, June raised the keychain again, running her thumb over the engraved initials. She tried to recall every detail her mother had shared about those hard times, the injustices, the wounded pride, the stolen opportunities. Maybe the pieces would fit together if she could gather more information. For now, uncertainty was all that remained. With a sigh, she followed Noah back to the living room, where the clock continued to tick, counting down the dwindling hours to Christmas. The mansion, once a stage for facades and appearances, had become a battleground for bitter memories. They needed to move quickly and uncover the truth before it was too late. June clutched the keychain, her skin prickling, and whispered, I know this name. He ruined my family's life. Noah stared at the object, stunned, unable to grasp the full scope of the problem. The minutes that followed were marked by a tense silence. Noah and June continued staring at the keychain she held in her hand, while Marta and Richard exchanged apprehensive glances, unable to grasp what was happening. Time seemed to hold its breath inside the mansion. Outside, the snow kept gently piling up in the garden, erasing footprints and muffling sounds. Yet, nothing could suppress the truths that were about to emerge. Where do you know that name from? Noah asked, his voice lower than usual. June took a moment to respond. Her mind wandered through bitter memories, her exhausted mother, mounting debts, and grueling work. There was a time when a powerful family had employed her mother as a cleaner and exploited her mercilessly. June didn't remember all the details, she had been too young, but she knew those injustices had deeply scarred their lives. Now, those initials engraved on the keychain brought it all rushing back. "My mother used to tell stories about a boss who treated her like trash," June said. "A man with that surname. He promised help, but left us to fend for ourselves. Our lives were never the same after that." Her voice was firm, but there was a tremble at the end of her sentence. Noah remained silent, pondering the past he didn't know and the murky dealings of his family. Could the blackmailer be deliberately playing with old grievances, placing June in his path on purpose? Richard interrupted his thoughts. "We're running out of time. The blackmailer isn't showing any sign of compromise, and the press is getting closer to uncovering something. What's our next move?" Noah frowned, pressing his temples. He knew they had to understand the past to untangle the present. "Let's head back to the attic. There are more documents up there. Maybe we missed something. We don't have much time." They climbed upstairs together, this time more cautiously. Marta stayed below, preparing strong tea to calm everyone's nerves. The attic's dim lighting felt even more oppressive, as if every stacked box held painful secrets. June's footsteps were soft on the old wooden floor, and Noah held a flashlight, illuminating dusty corners. The place still carried the scent of aged paper and damp wood. They searched through drawers and chests, yellowed papers, handwritten letters, and old contracts. Over and over, the same surname appeared, sometimes as a partner, other times as a rival. June found references to unpaid compensations, broken agreements, and unfulfilled promises. Noah, stunned, saw evidence that his father, once respected, had engaged in fierce disputes with business partners. Some were victims of fraud. Others had orchestrated legal traps. The full picture was still missing pieces, but it became clear that a long-standing family feud had spanned generations. In a small iron box with a rusty lock, they found a bundle of letters tied with twine. As they opened it, the pages crackled, revealing bold handwriting and faded ink. Noah and June knelt beside the flashlight, carefully reading the correspondence. The letters spoke of betrayal, unpaid debts, and notes addressed to Noah's father, suggesting he had tried to remedy past injustices. One passage promised to make amends to harmed families, including a surname that matched June's mother, cited in a line veiled with regret and implied apologies. June's heart raced. "He knew my family. Your father was aware of the wrongs and tried to make things right. But it seems he never had the time or the chance." Noah paled. Until that moment, he had believed his father, though distant, was merely cold and calculating. Now he discovered another side, one possibly pressured, guilt-ridden, and, at the last moment, attempting to set some lives back on course. June discreetly wiped away a tear. This wasn't what she had expected to find. Could there have been genuine remorse beneath the wealth's icy facade? Richard climbed into the attic, approaching quietly. "I found something in the hall," he said, switching on a weak lamp in the corner. More muddy footprints by the back door. Someone was prowling around again. They looked up, alarmed. The blackmailer, or their accomplices, wouldn't give up easily. They needed to act fast. June, still silent, flipped through more papers and found a small leather-bound diary. When she opened it, the scent of dust filled her nose. She recognized the handwriting. It must have belonged to Noah's father. In its pages were detailed paragraphs of business dealings and regrets, mentions of a bankrupt former partner who harbored hatred against the family after being cut out of an inheritance. A name was underlined, the same one that had appeared in the blackmailer's documents, and there was a clear reference to the neighborhood where June had grown up. Noah leaned over her shoulder, the two reading together, their breaths in sync. The diary described a man who had lost everything and blamed Noah's family. This man had threatened to expose secrets, destroy their reputation, and, if possible, ensnare innocent parties in his revenge. June realized she hadn't been chosen at random. She was part of a larger reckoning. Her mother's past exploitation and Noah's father's unresolved guilt were all connected. They exchanged glances, realizing they had found a critical piece of the puzzle. The diary could incriminate the real villain, the mastermind behind the blackmail. But before they could celebrate, a loud noise came from downstairs. It sounded like a heavy knock at the front door. Marta yelled something unintelligible. Richard hurried down the stairs, and Noah quickly tucked the diary under his arm. June's heart raced. It was likely the blackmailer, growing impatient. "We have to go down," Noah said nervously. "This diary is our weapon. We won't let him win." June nodded, still trying to process everything. The villain had been cunning enough to exploit Noah's vulnerability and June's desperation, intertwining their fates to inflict maximum pain. But now, they knew the truth and had something to expose the blackmailer's dirty tactics. They needed to plan their next move. As they descended, the sound of hurried footsteps in the hall grew louder. The press could swarm the property. Noah's family might insist on a video call, and the blackmailer would demand payment. June took a deep breath, glancing at the diary in Noah's arms. It was a bitter treasure, filled with past sins but also a chance to right some wrongs. She hoped that, in the end, they could clear their names and perhaps bring some peace to the two families entangled in this web of intrigue. At another loud knock on the door, Noah shut the diary tightly. They knew time was running out. The blackmailer would demand an answer soon, and now they had a secret weapon. The insistent knocking at the front door made everyone's hearts race faster. Noah, still clutching the diary tightly under his arm, descended the stairs with June and Richard close behind. Downstairs, Marta peered through a crack in the living room curtain, pale, as camera flashes flickered through the window. The press was outside, sniffing for a scandal. Christmas Eve was approaching, but the traditional atmosphere of peace and joy felt like a distant echo. "They want statements," Marta said, her voice tense. "They're speculating why you haven't made an appearance yet, Noah. They're saying something's wrong." Noah clenched his jaw in frustration. They couldn't show weakness now. They had to navigate this situation carefully. He subtly raised the diary for Richard and June to see, as if to say, "We have the key." June approached the window, observing the reporters with their cameras and microphones, waiting for any sign of movement. She knew that if the blackmail went public, it would destroy Noah's reputation, and hers. It wasn't just his image at stake. Her own precarious standing would also crumble. She couldn't afford to be at the center of a scandal. She needed a quick plan. "What if we pretended everything was fine?" she suggested. "Decorate the house for Christmas, act as if nothing's wrong, while we work behind the scenes." Noah ran a hand through his hair, tense, but agreed. They decided to present a facade to the press. Meanwhile, Richard would discreetly contact a police officer he trusted, seeking help without disclosing too much. They needed protection for the encounter with the blackmailer. Noah would send an anonymous message, arranging a meeting and offering money in exchange for silence. But they would secretly bring the diary, an ace up their sleeve to expose the truth. Now calmer, Marta began tidying the main living room. She lit candles, adjusted the Christmas tree, and scattered decorations. Though the press couldn't see the house's interior in detail, the soft lighting and faint music would give the impression that everything was on script. Meanwhile, June stood in front of a hallway mirror, fixing her hair. She had to appear calm, even as her heart pounded in her chest. Richard informed Noah, "I got in touch with my police contact. He can't raid the mansion without clear evidence, but he'll stay nearby. If we can draw the blackmailer out, we might catch him." Noah nodded, his expression distant. June noticed he was struggling with anger and fear. Perhaps he had never faced such a direct threat before. She lightly touched his arm, hoping to offer some support. He glanced at her, hesitated, then gave a faint smile of gratitude. Meanwhile, the blackmailer's text messages kept coming, each more aggressive, demanding payment and threatening the family's reputation. Noah replied, agreeing to negotiate, but only on the following night, in the garden, beneath the illuminated Christmas tree. It was a risky bait, but a necessary one. Christmas Eve was approaching fast, and time was running out. Outside, the snow continued to fall. The hours dragged on, and the tension mounted. As the night deepened, the house took on a surreal atmosphere. Christmas decorations, the scent of cinnamon in the air, and hushed, tense whispers in the corners. Marta served a simple meal, but no one had an appetite. They merely pretended, sharing a timid toast while exchanging worried glances. June and Noah quickly retreated to the office, taking the diary with them. As they flipped through more pages, they found names confirming the blackmailer's identity. It was, as they suspected, a disgraced former business partner of Noah's father, someone who had lost everything and now sought revenge. He had also involved June's family as a pawn in his scheme, deliberately choosing her to heighten the drama. The revelation sparked a deep anger in June. This wasn't just about money. It was about ensuring everyone got hurt. "He'll pay for this," she said, fists clenched. Noah nodded, gently placing his hand on hers. "If you'll let me, I want to fix what my family failed to in the past." She saw sincerity in his eyes. The man who had hired her in desperation now seemed genuinely willing to help her, not just use her as a front. A strange sensation washed over her. Relief, perhaps, or the budding of trust. They leaned closer, but their moment was interrupted by footsteps in the hallway. Richard entered quickly, announcing that the press was beginning to disperse. The reporters were growing weary of the cold night without fresh updates. This gave them some reprieve. In the hallway, Marta was closing windows and strategically turning on lights. The festive atmosphere barely masked the tension, but it was better than nothing. June went to her makeshift bedroom, staring at the suitcase in the corner. She thought about leaving. She hadn't been paid enough to face such danger, but something kept her there, perhaps the prospect of finally uncovering the past, clearing her mother's name, and standing up against injustice. She put on a coat, steadied herself, and returned to the living room. Noah greeted her with a look of gratitude. He didn't say anything, but she understood that he valued her presence. The next hours were spent in preparation. Cameras were hidden in the garden, and signals were agreed upon with Richard and his police contact. The plan was simple. The blackmailer would come to collect the payment, and they would pretend to comply while secretly recording everything and preparing to expose the diary's contents. If everything went well, the man would be caught red-handed. But there were risks. He could be armed, or he could bring backup. Every moment felt like a new threat. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the grass and the bare tree branches. Christmas Eve was only hours away, and the tension inside the mansion was unbearable. Noah sank into an armchair, exhausted, staring at the fireplace. June knelt beside him. "It'll work," she whispered, uncertain but determined to believe. He held her hand. In that moment, they felt closer than ever. Two people caught in a whirlwind they hadn't caused. They almost kissed, seeking comfort amidst the chaos, but footsteps in the hallway interrupted them again. Richard entered, giving a thumbs up. Everything was ready. All that remained was to wait for the following night, at the appointed time. Noah and June knew that would be the decisive moment. The blackmailer would demand money. They would pretend to hand it over. But the goal was to reveal the entire scheme. If they succeeded, they would walk away unscathed. If they failed, everything would be lost. At the end of the day, Noah received one last message. The meeting would take place in the garden, at midnight, under the light of the outdoor Christmas tree. When midnight finally approached, the mansion's garden was cloaked in a white veil of snow, illuminated only by the colorful lights of the outdoor Christmas tree. The scene carried an air of irony, a postcard-perfect, serene landscape about to become the stage for a dark reckoning. Noah and June stepped into the garden wrapped in heavy coats, their boots sinking into the soft frost with each step. The air was so cold, it burned their lungs, their breath forming faint clouds in front of their solemn faces. Richard was strategically hidden behind a tall bush, his nerves frayed as he clutched a camera. Occasionally, he glanced toward the side fence, trying to spot if the police contact had taken position. Marta watched anxiously from the kitchen window, hands clasped in silent prayer. It was Christmas Eve, but the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Noah held a thick envelope, pretending it contained money, while June kept her expression taut, her eyes scanning the garden's darkness. It didn't take long for the blackmailer to appear. First, a hooded figure emerged from the far side of the fence, striding purposefully as if familiar with the grounds. As he approached the illuminated tree, he raised his head and pulled a scarf over his face, revealing only cold, calculating eyes. He held a gun in his hand, pointed discreetly at the ground but visible enough to command respect. Noah swallowed hard, and June lifted her chin, fighting the fear roaring in her chest. "I'm here," the villain said, his voice low and grave. "The money." Noah raised the envelope, maintaining a cautious distance. "It's all here. But first, I want assurance that the photos, the documents, everything you have against me and June will be destroyed." The man let out a dry laugh. "Assurance? You're in no position to demand anything." He took a step closer, his boots crunching through the snow, while the Christmas tree twinkled softly, giving the scene an oddly festive air. June pressed her lips together, glancing at Noah, who struggled to keep his composure. The blackmailer didn't know they were being recorded. If everything went as planned, the footage would serve as evidence of his crimes. But it was a gamble. The man now raised his gun, aiming it skyward in a menacing gesture. "Hand over the money, or I'll expose everything. Your name, your fake Christmas charity, your father's shady dealings, and let's not forget your sweet waitress here." The media would love a story like that. A flash of anger crossed June's face. She wasn't just a pawn in this game. And Noah, sensing her defiance, tried to reason with the man. "You don't need to do this. You can walk away rich, unnoticed. Why take such a risk?" The blackmailer narrowed his eyes, advancing slowly toward the tree. "You think it's just about money, Noah. This is vengeance. Your family destroyed mine." I was discarded, lost everything. Now I'll destroy your name, your trust, your inheritance, and her. He gestured toward June with his chin. She's the icing on the cake, a casualty from the past, placed beside you to prove you're all the same kind of people. June's blood boiled. My family was ruined by people like you and your dirty games. I'm not part of this theater. The man chuckled bitterly. Oh, but you are. Why do you think you were chosen? Because your story intertwines with his. It was the perfect way to strike everyone at once. Noah struggled to keep calm. Here's the money. Take it, then disappear. He extended the envelope, stepping closer. But before he could hand it over, the blackmailer fired a shot into the air, making everyone flinch. Enough talk. Hand over the money now, or your Christmas ends before it starts. Richard flinched at the gunshot, gripping the camera tighter. The police, alerted beforehand, should have been ready, but the situation was delicate. Noah took another step. All right, take it. He held out the envelope, trying to steady his voice. June, standing beside him, seized the moment. Pretending to stumble, she distracted the blackmailer, forcing him to glance away for a split second. It was enough. Richard raised the camera, capturing the man's face as he briefly tugged the scarf down to breathe. But the villain was shrewd. Sensing the trick, he stepped back, pulling the scarf up again. Nice try, but I'm not falling for cheap tricks. He lunged forward, snatching the envelope from Noah's hand. Tearing it open, he discovered the ruse, a few real bills wrapped around shredded paper. A trap, he snarled, furious. He turned to flee, but June was faster. Moving deftly through the snow, she grabbed his coat, trying to stop him. He shook her off, sending her sprawling to the ground. Noah took advantage of the moment, charging at the blackmailer, who reacted by pointing the gun at him. A sharp crack echoed. A bullet struck an antique mirror on the veranda, shattering it into 1,000 glittering shards. June scrambled to her knees, panicked, unsure if Noah was hurt. Luckily, he was unharmed, only stunned by the noise. Richard emerged from his hiding spot, rushing to tackle the blackmailer. The moon cast its glow over the garden, the snow and shards of glass creating a surreal backdrop. The man fought back, knocking Richard to the ground. He was ready to escape again, but before scaling the fence, he stopped, lowering his scarf briefly to point the gun at June. You were part of my plan too. I relied on your hatred, your anger. I wanted you two to destroy each other, to expose the filthy truths between your families. But you disappointed me by protecting this traitor to your past. June, her breathing ragged, stood her ground. The blackmailer whispered, just for her to hear. Your mother lost everything because of his family. Think carefully. Do you really want to forgive them? She didn't respond, her eyes blazing with fury. He chuckled bitterly and vaulted over the fence, vanishing into the darkness, leaving them breathless and shaken. Noah knelt beside June, taking her hand. Are you okay? She nodded, though her face betrayed her inner turmoil. Richard lay on the ground, rubbing his sore arm. The police arrived moments later, too late to apprehend the blackmailer. The once pristine garden now bore marks of struggle, shattered glass, and chaotic footprints. Marta screamed from the window, distraught. It was Christmas, but instead of peace, there was only chaos. Noah's arm was scratched by the glass, a superficial wound, but June trembled inside. The image of the fleeing blackmailer and his whispered accusations haunted her. They now knew the man's identity, a distant relative of Noah, driven by deep-seated grudges. They also realized June's role was no accident. It was all a cruel game meant to ensnare them both. June pressed her hand to Noah's wound, tears brimming in her eyes. Noah whispered, "It's not over. We can still beat him." The night remained silent, as if the now deserted garden tried to erase the traces of the confrontation. Noah, his arm bandaged, walked slowly down the mansion's hallway, leaning against the wall for support. Marta, in tears, had offered him hot tea and a blanket to keep warm. Richard, nursing both his bruised ego and aching arm, muttered quietly while sitting in a corner of the room. The police, after a brief sweep, had left without making any arrests. For all intents and purposes, there was no solid evidence pointing to the blackmailer's identity or whereabouts, only the shaky footage from Richard's camera. The air was heavy with frustration. June sat on the rug in front of the fireplace, hugging her knees, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. She tasted the bitterness of disappointment, not just over failing to catch the culprit, but also from the turmoil in her heart. She had learned that Noah's family had tried to make amends for past wrongs, but too late. And now, this man, a distant cousin or an unfairly treated associate, had made her feel used once more. She needed answers, but, more importantly, needed to decide what to do next. Noah approached and sat beside her. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I failed. I couldn't protect you. Or myself." She looked up, seeing the pain etched on his face. It wasn't just physical pain, but a deeper wound, a blow to his confidence. The shame of dragging June into this nightmare. "It wasn't your fault," she said, her voice trembling. "You didn't know how deep these secrets went." That brief exchange formed a thread of understanding between them. For the first time, they were no longer just employer and employee or accomplices in a charade. They were on the same side, victims of a trap far bigger than themselves. Outside, the snow continued to fall, now like a silent blanket of hope. Marta left the room quietly, respecting their moment. Richard, still grumbling, went off to tend to his injured arm. Only the crackling fire and the tired breathing of Noah and June remained. "We have the diary," Noah reminded her, running a hand through his hair. "It could help us prove who the real culprit is. But without the blackmailer here, we don't have a confession." June nodded. "If we can show these letters, these documents, maybe the police can piece it together. But what about the press and your family? They're already suspicious." Noah was silent for a moment. Christmas was near, and all they had was chaos. After a pause, he gave a sad smile. "My father left these clues. I think he wanted to make things right. He never got the chance to send the letters or the checks. Maybe we can finish what he started." She agreed, thinking about her own mother and how much difference that help would have made years ago. Dawn wasn't far off. As the first light of day crept into the room, Noah, June, Marta, and Richard gathered around the desk in the study, analyzing the diary's pages and the additional documents found in the attic. Among the notes were details of legal disputes, names of those wronged, and indications that Noah's father had planned to compensate entire families. June's mother's surname was there, highlighted in faded ink as one of the priorities. Noah took a deep breath, turning the final page. "If we reveal this, People will see that my father tried to do the right thing. We can show that the blackmail was a petty act of revenge by someone who didn't want reparations, only destruction. Richard nodded thoughtfully. But it's risky. What if the press twists everything? What if the blackmailer comes back and attacks us again? Marta, who had been quiet, whispered, "Sometimes the truth is our best weapon." June stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the garden, now marked by footprints and patches where the snow had been disturbed. Despite the confusion, she felt a strange solace there. She had discovered that beneath the arrogance and wealth, there had been a man who tried to right wrongs, and now his son was trying to continue that effort. Not all was lost. Perhaps by exposing the truth, they could turn the tide. Noah noticed June's expression and managed a faint smile, though tired. "If you want to leave, I'll understand. This is too dangerous. I wouldn't blame you." She took a step forward, shaking her head. "I've come this far. I need to see how it ends. Besides, I don't want to be remembered just as the deceived waitress. I want to show that I'm here for more than money." Her words took Noah by surprise. He gently took her hand, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. In that moment, amidst the troubles, they chose to stand as allies, not out of obligation, but by choice. The trust growing between them was priceless. Perhaps, if they had met under different circumstances, things would have been easier. But life worked that way, presenting challenges and revealing who we truly were amidst hardships. By mid-morning, the press began circling the property again. This time, Noah decided to face the situation. He invited them for a brief statement from a distance, not allowing them inside. Standing before the cameras, he declared, "There have been incidents, but we are fine. We'll have an important announcement on Christmas Eve before dinner." The reporters shouted questions, but he stood firm, promising more details soon. It was a risk, but he needed time to craft a plan. Inside the house, June and Richard organized the diary's materials into chronological folders. Marta prepared a warm broth, filling the kitchen with the comforting aroma of thyme. The atmosphere, though tense, felt more unified. Everyone was playing their part, forming an impromptu team. The snow outside, once merely cold and hostile, now seemed like a protective blanket, shielding them from the world until they were ready. In the early afternoon, Noah and June climbed back to the attic, sifting through boxes and uncovering more old newspaper clippings. There were small victories and significant defeats, secrets Noah's father had likely wanted to keep hidden. But instead of fearing the past, they now faced it with determination. Each discovery reinforced their resolve to do the right thing, to expose the whole story, clear Noah's name, and show that June was far more than a pawn. While flipping through the final pages, June felt the warmth of Noah's hand on her shoulder. She turned, her eyes glistening. He smiled, and for a moment, the tension and pain seemed to ease. They had a plan: present the truth to Noah's family, the press, and the authority. Using the diary, the letters, and the documents, they would unveil the true villain and their motivations. If everything went well, the blackmailer would no longer control their lives. With the diary in hand, June and Noah descended the stairs, ready to turn their suffering into something redemptive. It wouldn't be easy. The villain was still at large, and Christmas Eve was fast approaching. But now, they weren't alone. They had the truth, they had each other, and they were prepared to face whatever came their way. It was a risky step, but the only path to a fairer ending. Noah, his gaze steady, said to June, "This time we'll be ready. He won't defeat us." Christmas Eve had arrived, but the atmosphere in the mansion was far from traditionally festive. Lights and decorations gleamed, and the fireplace crackled in the main hall, but a thick tension filled the air. Noah, dressed in a dark sweater, adjusted his laptop on the desk. His distant family was waiting for a video call. They wanted to see the so-called special Christmas guest and confirm that Noah wasn't spending the holidays alone and aimless. Little did they know about the storm that had been brewing since early December. June paced back and forth, organizing the documents, diary, and letters they had uncovered. Richard discreetly adjusted hidden cameras throughout the room, while Marta checked the curtains to ensure the lighting was just right. Outside, reporters camped beyond the gate, and the police, quietly informed, kept watch from a distance, ready to intervene if the blackmailer dared to appear again. This time, things would be different. When the video call began, familiar faces filled the screen. Uncles, cousins, an elderly grandfather, all seated in elegant living rooms, curious about why Noah insisted on a Christmas Eve transmission. June, standing beside Noah, took a deep breath. Revealing the truth wouldn't be easy. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Good evening. Merry Christmas to you all," he began. "Before we start the dinner, there's something important I need to share. Something that will change how you see me and how you see our family." The family on the screen frowned, exchanging suspicious glances. Silence enveloped the room. Noah continued, his voice steady but restrained. "In recent days, I've been the target of blackmail. Someone tried to tarnish my name, using secrets from the past, and—" He glanced at June. "Even involving an innocent person, June, who is here with me. I have proof that the blackmailer is a distant relative, someone who has harbored resentment for a long time." Whispers of surprise and shock rippled through the connection. June swallowed hard, but remained strong. Richard, standing in the corner, gave a subtle nod, signaling that everything was being recorded. Marta, slightly withdrawn, wrung her hands nervously. Noah raised the diary and letters to the camera. "My father, despite his mistakes, tried to right some of the wrongs of the past. These documents contain evidence that some families suffered because of our business dealings. He intended to compensate them, writing letters of apology and offering financial aid. One of these families is June's." He gently touched June's arm, encouraging her to step closer to the camera. She did, her heart pounding. June isn't here for easy money. She was caught up in a plan to humiliate me and expose old secrets. But she discovered the truth alongside me. Together, we decided not to hide anymore. We're going to tell the full story and name the real culprit. Noah paused, looking at Richard, who promptly activated one of the hidden cameras. Footage of the garden confrontation and the gun threat played on the screen. Horrified expressions appeared on the faces of those watching. The family stared, stunned, as the footage showed the masked blackmailer, the struggle, and the shot fired at a mirror. Noah then displayed old newspaper clippings and excerpts from the diary, revealing the name of a disgraced former business partner, a relative who had been excluded from the inheritance. "This man is responsible," Noah declared. "He wanted to ruin my Christmas, my reputation, and June's life. He thought we would destroy each other. But he failed because we chose to face the truth instead of hiding." Voices erupted on the other end of the call, some demanding to know who this relative was and why they'd never heard of him. Noah didn't waver. He disappeared years ago but returned seeking revenge. Now, we have proof, and we'll present it to the police. I'm no longer afraid of blackmail. I won't keep dirty secrets." A noise echoed from the hallway, and everyone in the room froze. Richard signaled for caution, discreetly dialing the police. Marta stepped behind the door. June stiffened, but Noah kept the call going, determined to show he had nothing to hide. "If we're interrupted, you'll see the truth live," he said to the family. Then, from a side door, the villain emerged, partially masked, a scarf around his neck, his face twisted in rage. He was armed again, but hesitant, aware that everyone was watching, not just those in the room, but also Noah's family on the screen and likely the police outside. "Do you think this will save you, Noah?" he growled. "Do you think exposing me will erase your sins? You're just a spoiled heir, and she," he pointed the gun at June, "is just a pawn." June clenched her fists. "I'm no one's pawn," she said firmly. "You used me, but I won't fall for your trap again." He laughed, mocking her. "And what are you going to do? Now everyone knows about your family's dirty past." Noah stepped forward, steady despite the fear. "I'm not perfect, but I won't hide. You're the coward. You don't even dare show your full face." The blackmailer hesitated, hearing faint sirens in the distance. The police were closing in. Richard gestured toward the window as officers arrived swiftly and silently. Cornered, the blackmailer tried to retreat but had few options. The family on the screen watched in disbelief, some shouting warnings, others in stunned silence. Marta, trembling, opened the door as two officers entered with weapons drawn, ordering the blackmailer to drop his gun. He resisted, firing at an antique chandelier, shattering glass across the floor, but was quickly subdued. He fell to his knees, panting, as the police restrained him. June stepped back, trembling with relief, while Noah approached the camera. "You've seen it. I have nothing left to hide. This man tried to destroy us, but the truth is here, documented. Now, we can clear our names and fulfill the promises my father couldn't in his lifetime." The distant family watched silently, some ashamed, others moved. No one ended the call. As the police escorted the blackmailer away, the room fell eerily quiet. Shards of glass littered the floor. The scent of gunpowder lingered, but a sense of relief settled over the group. June, standing in the corner, wiped away a stubborn tear. Noah approached her gently. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, still shaken but resolute. Noah took her hand firmly, standing before the family on the screen. Richard turned off the secondary camera. The police exited, and Marta began sweeping up the broken glass, muttering about dramatic nights. With the villain exposed and arrested, there were no more threats. What remained was the task of rebuilding trust, sharing their story publicly, and fulfilling the reparations Noah's father had envisioned. Amid it all, Noah and June exchanged a look, one of understanding and connection, as if they had walked through fire and now deserved some peace. Noah took a deep breath, clutching the diary, and whispered to June, "There's still something we need to uncover before sunrise." The Christmas Eve night advanced in silence, interrupted only by the crackling of wood in the fireplace. Noah and June were in the study, an old diary resting on the desk, its pages illuminated by a warm, yellowish lamp. The house was gradually calming down. Marta was finishing picking up shards of glass, while Richard reviewed recordings, ensuring they had enough material to hand over to the police and prove Noah's innocence. Outside, snow fell serenely, as if trying to cleanse the traces of the recent chaos. Noah carefully flipped through the pages, searching for what he needed. He knew that somewhere within the diary lay an unsent letter, a final and crucial piece of this complicated story. June sat beside him, observing every expression on his face, every line of concern. Now that the blackmailer had been arrested, nothing stood in the way of uncovering the full truth. And there was something the blackmailer had mentioned: an offer of reparation, a plea for forgiveness that had never reached its intended recipient. It was time to uncover what it was. Noah's fingertips trembled as his eyes settled on a yellowed envelope wedged between two pages of the diary. It was addressed to June's mother, penned in the firm handwriting of Noah's father. June leaned in, holding her breath. "Open it," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. Noah looked up at her, seeking her consent, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there was a lengthy letter and an old, expired check, symbolic but poignant. The letter detailed how Noah's father, after realizing the harm his former partner had caused June's family, intended to compensate them, apologize, and extend an olive branch. It wasn't just out of guilt, but also a belated sense of justice. He mentioned names, dates, and promised financial support. More than that, he expressed hope that one day the families could reconcile. The letter had never been sent. Perhaps time, pride, or his untimely death had kept it from fulfilling its purpose. June's eyes filled with restrained tears. Reading those words felt like receiving a gift that should have arrived years ago. She knew how much her mother had struggled and suffered, how such a gesture could have made a difference back then. But now she understood there was something deeper than resentment and injustice. There was an intention for reconciliation, a desire to right wrongs. It wouldn't change the past, but it could bring peace to the present. Noah placed his hand over hers. "I wish I had known about this sooner. If I'd had the courage to look into my family's past, maybe none of this would have happened." She shook her head, wiping away a persistent tear. "We can't change what's already done. But today, we can do what's right." He nodded, gripping her fingers more firmly. The clock marked the arrival of Christmas morning. They descended the stairs side by side, carrying the diary and the letter. Marta met them in the hallway, her eyes tired but filled with warmth, holding a tray with fresh bread and hot chocolate. Richard was in the living room, finishing an email to the officer in charge of the case, attaching the pertinent videos and documents. The house was finally at peace, the first genuine peace since June had arrived. By the fireplace, Noah and June sat on the rug, sharing steaming cups. He handed her the letter, as if entrusting her with a priceless treasure. "It belongs to you," he said softly. "When you're ready, you can show it to your mother. I can't undo what happened, but I can commit to honoring my father's intentions. I truly want to help, not out of pity, but out of respect." June smiled, a shy but grateful smile. The warmth of the fire reflected in her eyes, making them glimmer. "Thank you," she murmured. That tumultuous night had transformed them. The figure of the solitary, arrogant, and distant millionaire had been replaced by an imperfect but sincere man who recognized his flaws and sought to make amends. The once timid and insecure young waitress was now someone who had endured the weight of secrets and emerged stronger. Outside, the sky lightened. It was Christmas. Snow blanketed the garden, where so many tensions had unfolded. In the distance, bells chimed as the town slowly awakened, unaware of the drama that had played out in that mansion. Noah and June remained there, wrapped in a good silence, comforted by a newfound understanding. Marta and Richard discreetly withdrew, giving them the space they needed. "Stay," Noah said after a while. "This time, I can't pay you with what truly matters, but I can offer companionship, honesty, and the chance to start anew." June chuckled softly, remembering how it all began with an absurd contract. Now, with no paper signed or financial deal, she felt the only thing that mattered was the truth between them. "I'll stay," she replied, warming her hands on the cup. "After all, I've learned that the most valuable gift can't be bought." A soft Christmas tune played on the radio as they toasted in silence. In the days ahead, they would present their evidence to the police, to journalists, and let the full story come to light. Noah's reputation would no longer be tarnished by lies, and June would not be remembered as a passive accomplice, but as someone who helped reveal the truth. Furthermore, the letter would allow for a quiet reconciliation between the two families, a path toward healing old wounds. Morning light bathed the interior of the mansion, illuminating the fireplace, the rug, and their faces with a gentle glow. The distant hum of cars, the stillness of the snow outside, and the aroma of fresh bread created an intimate and welcoming atmosphere. Noah and June talked about the future, exchanging smiles and uncertain but hopeful plans. They now truly knew each other. They understood that love wasn't something you could buy. It was something that grew from honest actions and mutual understanding. By giving the unsent letter to June's mother, they would open a new chapter, not only between themselves, but in the very story that had brought them together. It was an ending neither of them could have foreseen when it all began. The blackmailer was behind bars, the truth would come to light, and they could look each other in the eyes without masks or pretenses. The Christmas tree lights shone brighter now, reflected on the window glass, as they sipped the last of their hot chocolate. June knew her family had endured much, but now she could share the truth. The sincere intentions of Noah's father were there, materialized in a letter. And Noah had vowed to carry out those intentions, initiating the reparation that time hadn't allowed before. Noah raised his hand, lightly touching June's face, and she leaned in, closing her eyes. Silence enveloped them, and for a moment, there were no blackmails, no schemes, no contractual obligations. There was only the human warmth that had been missing from the start, and the certainty that Christmas had, after all, brought what truly mattered. In that instant, everything felt right. They toasted to sincerity, love, and the rebirth of two souls who had finally learned the value of truth. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.